Confirmed. Hit. Relay fragmenting. The declaration slid through the command deck of the Zorvane cruiser Veiltric like a snapped cable. No cheers followed. There was nothing glorious about vaporizing a derelict relay node tumbling in neutral orbit. The targeting officer's talons hovered above the ignition glyphs, pausing only to wipe condensation from the back of his wrist. Across the tactical bridge, eyes remained half-lidded, unimpressed. Commander Rael Voran stood at the central dais, expression unreadable beneath the rippling synth-scale collar of his uniform. His second, Vark Rethol, cocked his head as the playback replayed on the heads-up array, Earth's relay station, labeled X9R, now a smear of particulate arcing across empty coordinates. Reported as a sanitation strike, Voran said flatly. No data response, Rethol added, flipping the comm layer. Node didn't transmit a final ping. Then we did the galaxy a favor. Voran turned away. Log and move on. A junior analyst, Thren Velik, hesitated before closing the feed. Sir, the relay had an active sub-frequency, not broadcast grade, more like a clock. Voran didn't stop walking. A dead clock tells the correct time twice. Leave it. Behind them, the feed stuttered once before vanishing from the main array. No alarms triggered, no countermeasure alerts, just silence where Earth's infrastructure had flickered, for decades, without reply or consequence. 3 cycles later, the Zorvane Tribunal convened aboard Verilok Spire to ratify the demolition as an administrative clearance. The chamber was clinical, walls paneled in carbon gray, temperature locked at neutral bias, and lit from above by arrays that hummed so faintly one might mistake the silence for peace. Councillor Krevik Yor tapped his stylus once against the tribunal seal. The Terran relay identified as X9R, he began, was neither within territorial jurisdiction nor under classified protection. The directive to eliminate it aligns with our consensus protocols under Article 43 of the Redundancy Doctrine. He turned to the overseeing magistrate. The object exhibited no responsive intelligence, no threat matrices, and no stored deterrent data. Its destruction, while unannounced, poses no interstellar risk. No one spoke against him. Why would they? A side monitor flicked open, a recording from the cruiser Veiltric's log scrolled frame by frame. Earth's relay, covered in sensor scars and orbital etching, drifted alone in a tide of dust and forgotten telemetry buoys. Then the beam hit. The image brightened momentarily, white-hot lances tearing the node's infrastructure apart, followed by a dispersal that resembled confetti caught in solar wind. That concludes our incident debriefing, Yor concluded. This matter is hereby dismissed. No mention was made of the sub-frequency. No review was done on archived pulse patterns. No one summoned the interspatial treaty records. No one asked who originally installed Relay X9R, or what Earth had attached to its designation in the Treaty of Radiant Convergence. No one spoke the name Oren Silvac. Meanwhile, thousands of light-minutes away, under a bunker carved into Antarctic bedrock, a man named Dren Kavros stood before a dormant display, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the central filament, where a single glyph pulsed red, then gold, then black. He did not blink. Behind him, the command center's filtered ventilation pushed currents of cold, recycled air along the walls, making the static paper quiet. None of the officers seated at their posts said a word. The only audible movement came from the tactile press of fingers against solid-state consoles. No projection fields here, no fluidic gestures. Everything physical, everything exact. Kavros stepped forward. The system awaiting him displayed no alerts, no flags, no suggestion of urgency, just a terminated status update. X9R, relay chain discontinuity, acknowledged. No supplementary notes, no grief, no outrage, just the recognition that a node long considered irrelevant had ceased. At the back of the room, Valt Kuran entered, carrying a sealed case etched with legal burn marks from its last unlocking. He stopped beside Kavros, one hand resting lightly against the table's edge. They logged it as a waste management strike, Kuran said, voice low. Kavros's face remained unreadable. Good. Then they're not tracking the lattice keys. It was an anchor node, Kuran murmured. That relay was the root constant for over 300 navigational frameworks. Kavros finally looked at him. And we are no longer responsible for keeping them stable. He turned back to the screen. In the upper corner, The star charts began to flicker, not visibly, not yet, but the harmonics were off, stellar markers jittered on delay, signal reflection patterns reversed without causation. Kavros keyed a line into the system. The screen displayed a single code block, clause theta, oryx, deferred activation, legally bound, sealed, run audit, he said. In a far-off fleet corridor, someone might have noticed that the alignment matrix between jump points and mass reference hubs began to deviate by microdegrees. In an orbital maintenance ring, engineers noticed the calibration delta creeping upward on the inertial grid, but no one thought of Earth. No one asked where their frame anchors came from. No one remembered that the silent node they had vaporized was not transmitting for contact, but for alignment. Oren Silvac had written the protocol himself, not recently, not this cycle. Decades ago, when Earth withdrew from galactic infrastructure contributions and filed under the Protean Stabilization Clause, he had embedded it in legal frameworks, routing treaties, and non-territorial neutral platforms, not because Earth planned for war, but because Earth had once ensured that motion itself remained universal, and now, Earth was no longer obligated to do so. At the tribunal, Councillor Krivek Yor sipped from a narrow canister, reviewing his next docket. Nothing had followed the relay strike. The Terran Continuity Network remained dark, not a warning, not a protest, not even acknowledgement. He signed the report, closed. On his console, the system flickered once. An error message pulsed in the corner, minor, ignorable. Gravity resolution failed, external constant mismatch. He dismissed it. Outside, in orbit, a merchant vessel adjusted its trajectory and turned several degrees too far. Its inertial dampers overcorrected. Navigation buffered. Internal mass sink faltered. No collision followed. Nothing exploded. Just a subtle tilt, a delay, a ripple, and across the stars, hundreds of similar vessels began making similar corrections, small ones. For now, in Earth's bunker, Kavros sat down, folding his hands in front of him. They don't know what they've broken, Koran said behind him. No, Kavros replied, but they're going to feel it, sector by sector, axis by axis. The display dimmed to black, not as a threat, not as a gesture, just as a final note in a long symphony they'd forgotten Earth had written, and now refused to keep playing. Correct the drift again. And kill that sync alarm, it's wrong. Commander Relan Davrick's voice slashed through the bridge of the Varkalin, taut and raw as if shaved across stone. Crewmen flinched under the command deck's sapphire blue lighting, eyes flicking to the heads-up displays riddled with shifting coordinates and misaligned vectors. The navigation grid stuttered, alignment points blinking, reforming, then blinking again. The pilot, a pale-skinned Letheri hybrid named Vesk Tarn, braced his knees against the floor brace, sweat dripping along his temples despite the chill cycling through the command shaft. Third correction attempt failed, he muttered. Primary vector shows lateral skew. There's no axis lock. Again, Davrick snapped, pacing toward the side panel. We're under minimal thrust. There's no mass displacement. Tarn gestured to the laser plasma display nearest his elbow. Sir, every frame shift pulses off-center by 0.7 ticks. We're drifting without directional mass. Across the command bridge, officers leaned into their terminals with brows furrowed and jaws clenched. No one spoke beyond what was necessary. The air felt wrong. Not tense wrong. The kind of wrong that soaked deeper than confusion. That felt structural. Behind them, the stars on the viewport had begun to drift, not visibly, not theatrically, but just enough to make a trained navigator feel like the universe was trying to breathe without lungs. In the diagnostic vault of the Larenth Crucible, Torik Halfin stood alone, bathed in hard crimson from overlapping vector fault alerts. The chamber pulsed with intermittent silence, broken only by the calculated grind of gyro ray calibrators spinning in isolation. His fingers traced the arc of a manual printout taped to a ceramic buffer wall. He didn't look at the screens anymore. "Feed me fleet delta trajectory data," he called. From the back room, an assistant technician responded without stepping forward. "Already in buffer. 37 ships report offset translation beyond calibration." And they all corrected? No. Only 17 regained orientation. The rest adapted. Torik's eyes narrowed. Adapted to what? No answer. He stepped closer to the primary board, brushed dust off the manual override slab, and drew a fast diagonal line across 4 separate systems. The inertial correlation algorithm returned nonsense. That was the moment his spine cooled, not from shock, but from the certainty of a conclusion that had no visible logic, but only one possible cause. He touched the side console, dragging up a legacy protocol from 3 decades prior. X9R anchor node unreachable. There it was, one line, silent, undemanding, but louder than every alarm he'd ever heard. He didn't curse, he didn't blink. He pressed the record line. This is Halfin. I'm initiating diagnostic path Omega. Full relay collapse suspected. Anchor drift confirmed. X9R was holding alignment constants. No fallback systems show cross-sector coherence. He closed the feed. Then, for the first time in his career, he stepped away from his station without powering down the panel. Aboard the Zarithra coil, chaos bloomed in silence. 4 decks below command, navigational relays rerouted in loops, with output screens unable to resolve orbital vectors into readable formats. The ship's artificial gravity adjusted 6 times in under 3 minutes, each shift causing headaches, nausea, and increasingly erratic footfalls. On the bridge, navigator Jarek Tal observed the central map twist slightly, like ink smeared under shallow water. "Captain," he said slowly, "I think we've lost universal reference." Captain Vate groaned, didn't turn. He stared at the sector overview as entire clusters shifted a fraction of a degree off their projected arcs. "We're not lost," Groan murmured. "The stars are." Jarek shook his head. "With respect, sir, the stars can't move." "Then tell them that," Groan replied. The silence that followed grew thick with the weight of unspoken failure. Jarek pulled up the star chart overlay again, only to find the galactic spine misaligned from every calibration tool they possessed. His hands trembled slightly. "Gravity profiles aren't just wrong, they're uncooperative." That word made the room colder. "Define that," Groan said. "They respond but not together. Local masses aren't syncing with shared reference. The math changes depending on which direction we rotate toward. Every quadrant gives a different truth." Groan's eyes, normally unreadable, finally flicked to the young navigator. "Show me Earth's last update." The screen blinked. A dead relay. No signal. Somewhere in orbit above the dead zone of Krellis 10, merchant convoy Zyter's beacon misfired a portside acceleration burst meant to redirect its orientation before a gravitational slingshot. Instead it tumbled, not in flames, not violently, it just spun. The crew, trained across 20 systems, initiated recovery routines with discipline and calm, but the ship kept turning, off-axis, like a coin caught between flips. Every correction made it worse. Their guidance logs, synced to the Galactic Inertial Network, were misreporting mass. By the time a support tug attempted recovery, the beacon had broken formation with the rest of its convoy by several thousand kilometers, floating with inertia that shouldn't exist. Inside Earth's subterranean continuity hall, Dren Kavros folded his sleeves back as the simulation chamber finalized its 3rd trial. Starfields rendered onto the curved glass dome twisted, barely by rotational lag. Artificial constellations mapped against the old standards now disagreed with reference keys by more than 4 ticks. Not enough to shatter fleets, enough to make them crash themselves. Behind him, Saren Tharvik adjusted his seat and spoke without looking up. "Reports indicate 6 fleets have aborted warp. What about those that didn't?" Saren leaned forward, tapping the panel once. 2 are listed missing, 1 disintegrated mid-jump, another scattered into rogue debris patterns across a kilometer span. No cause listed. "They won't list one," Kavros said, "because there isn't one they can trace." Saren's gaze narrowed. "Are we going to explain?" "To whom?" Kavros stepped to the central board. "They don't even know what they used to depend on." He rotated the central dial. The anchor grid appeared, a skeletal lattice of calibration lines Earth once maintained, quietly, faithfully. "And now, not at all. Prepare Phase 2 alignment collapse," Kavros said. Saren paused. "Do you want to issue warnings?" Kavros shook his head. "Let them navigate." The screen dimmed. Outside the chamber, gravity didn't feel heavier, but the burden of knowledge did. "Fire control reads green. Confirm execution window." Silence answered. Commander Tereth Goran leaned closer to the heads-up panel, staring at the targeting overlay. Across the display, dozens of fleet markers hovered in formation, yet none responded. A full offensive wave had been prepared for 90 seconds. No launch, no contact, no detonation. He turned toward Ops Officer Rel Maran. Echo the strike command. Maran tapped the relay node twice, fingers sharp. Already did. Twice. Last transmission shows confirmation, 42 minutes ago. Goran blinked. That's impossible. I gave the order 12 seconds back. Maran looked up, brows furrowed. I know. 2 sectors away, the Ravenir Bastion veered to starboard, its port flanks catching the edge of an unmarked cruiser. Bulkheads screamed. Vibration thrummed through internal decking, jarring every boot to a stagger. Men fell sideways. One officer struck a wall and dropped to the floor, conscious but dazed. From the central command dais, Captain Das Colvin stared at the internal sensors, his face pale under the flickering emergency lights. That ship shouldn't be there. It wasn't on our approach vectors. First Mate Torkin swept across the deck, swiping a command strip onto the laser plasma wall. It was, an hour ago. Holvin's voice dropped. Then why didn't our proximity net catch it? Torkin pointed to the timestamp. We received the collision alert 49 minutes after it occurred. In Earth's subterranean continuity hall, Torek Halvin reviewed the desync feed with hands braced against the railing of the temporal simulation. Well, below, particle drift models tangled like algae in fluid motion, threads weaving in and out of agreement. Timestamps floated beside each pulse, none of them linear. They're off pattern, he said, eyes narrowing. On the overhead arc, data pinged again. 12 fleet command centers had launched mirrored counteroffensives, each hitting empty space where targets had been long before or hadn't yet arrived. Command packets arrived long after the threats had passed. They're not just off, they're late, Torek murmured. Saren Tharvik approached, expression unreadable. Any recoveries? Torek shook his head slowly. There's no reference grid anymore. Each system is improvising time. Saren leaned against the rail. They won't figure it out. They'll try, Torek said, and they'll miss their own footsteps. On board the Vashkir Rain, a timing array failed to initiate targeting sync. The weapons master, a lean, methodical officer named Vel Krass, watched the clock digits jitter, not stall, wobble, like light bent through shattered glass. Weapons timer just hit 0, Krass muttered, but nothing fired. Captain Inrad Drell stared at the main panel. That's the third failed volley. This isn't system damage, it's sequencing collapse. Krass turned slowly. Our entire fire command thinks it already happened. Has it? Drell asked. Krass didn't answer. The timestamp hovered, 0 o'clock, 00, frozen, no reset, no trigger. Time refused to move forward. At the Zorvane High Orbital Nexus, Tribunal Analyst Yaren Solvik ran a multi-sector diagnostic sweep after internal sensors failed to resolve a long-range telemetry sync. The main console scrolled dozens of independent time logs, each arguing with the others. Why are these running backward? He whispered. Another analyst stepped beside him. They're not. They're returning corrected averages. From what? Solvik asked. No response. He activated a laser plasma grid, aligning sector paths over their projected timelines. They're folding, Solvik said quietly. The timelines are folding over each other. Behind him, someone exhaled, but the sound felt off, as if it had reached the room before the breath. Meanwhile, on the fringes of Varn space, the Meraxis Dre collided with its own escort ship during a simple orbital maneuver. There had been no miscommunication. The ships had acknowledged each other. They had even adjusted for approach vectors, but they'd done it 4 hours apart. Neither knew the other was moving at that moment. In the wreckage, transmission records showed identical signals, time-stamped 47 minutes apart, sent within the same operational second. No one could explain how. Inside the Earth Command Vault, Kavros watched the synchronization feed fracture like a mirror under slow pressure. The data didn't break, it warped, pushing against the edges of comprehension. He pressed his fingertips together and addressed the AI sequence. Execute desync ladder phase 2. The system acknowledged with a pulsing tone. Kavros turned toward Torek, who stood behind him without expression. You once said this could only happen if every sector depended on one constant. Torek nodded. And now they're all waiting for a beat that doesn't exist anymore. They'll try to invent one. Torek's voice was quieter now. and it'll break every time they compare it to what was. In fleet-wide command arrays, communications collapsed into noise. Commands sent across systems arrived after the engagements ended. Warning flares launched retroactively. Convoys panicked, thinking they had not sent arrival signals, only to find confirmation logs dated 3 hours earlier. In one case, a fleet fired on itself, responding to a threat that had never arrived, based on orders that hadn't yet been given. The Dorshik Lance, a seasoned Dread-class war cruiser, initiated evasive maneuvers after receiving a report of a nearby gravity mine. No mine was present. The warning had been triggered by a sensor glitch, but by the time the correction arrived, the Lance had sheared through an Allied command module. The timestamp difference, 76 minutes. Neither ship knew which of them had made the mistake. On Earth the map dimmed. Sector after sector blinked from blue to white, not as territories lost, but as clocks collapsed. They weren't destroyed. They were no longer agreeing on when they were. Cavro spoke with finality. No timeline, no war. You can delay the motion, or you can face it, Valt Koran said, but it's already lodged. Across the dim-lit arbitration hall of the Concord Judiciary Complex, his voice carried without emphasis, every syllable landing like a measured knock. No embellishment, no rise or fall, just the brutal cadence of enacted protocol. The tribunal chamber stretched out in a crescent of silence, counselors seated in arch-tiered rows, ambient panels washing the walls in pale indigo. Every species in the Concord Assembly had sent a representative. Most had arrived with the expectation of protest. Earth had not requested a hearing. Earth had filed, and Earth did not attend in person. Koran remained standing at the central projection slab, one gloved hand resting on a case that hadn't been opened in 71 years. The seal across its top still bore the scar of its original signing, 3 sharp indents beneath the embossed numeral 14. He slid the latch free, the case side open with the dry hiss of aged carbon plate. Inside rested a series of treaty ciphers, unreadable without deep frame authentication keys. He didn't remove them. He didn't need to. The heads-up displays lining the hall's upper ridge flickered. A single clause bloomed across every screen. Radiant convergence. Article 14. Clause recursive asset nullification. Status reactivated. Across the benches, the reaction wasn't loud, just the shift of bodies, the flex of robes, a few audible exhales. Some of them had signed the accord. Some of them had inherited its consequences. High Arbiter Senros Veld leaned forward, voice creaking with habitual authority. Clause 14 was never ratified for activation. Koran raised an eyebrow. Incorrect. Clause 14 was pre-activated at the time of the radiant convergence under dormant contingency. Earth filed that redundancy via legal mesh in Cycle 62. That clause is recursive. It had to be. Veld narrowed his eyes. You're triggering a lattice cascade. Koran didn't move. We're acknowledging a breach. The cascade is simply punctual. On the left tier, Diplomat Frax Valen of the Ver Coalition rose half a measure. Surely Earth does not intend to collapse the entire treaty base over a structural node. Objection, Koran interrupted. Not loud, not sharp. Clause 14 defines violation of a stabilization relay as active aggression under interstellar calibration law. Earth was maintaining that station under neutrality provision, ratified under your jurisdiction. Your fleet struck it unprovoked. Earth does not collapse the treaty. Earth stops supporting it. There was a pause, then a flicker. Above the council, one of the larger heads-up displays pulsed gold, then drained to black. A second followed, then 8 more, 32 sectors, then 74. Real-time economic enforcement scripts began shuttering open access ports. Contractual frameworks tied to Concord logistics networks began returning recursive violations. No alarms, no explosions, just voided compliance. Veld turned to the control clerk. Override those connections. Reroute through the arbitration core. The clerk's hands moved swiftly across the control deck. Then slower still. They're not accepting override keys. Force routed. The clerk swallowed. The keys aren't invalid. They're irrelevant. In the subterranean wing of Earth's continuity vault, Koran's twin relay nodes, one seated in deep legal drive, one bound to treaty enforcement overlays, flared briefly, Gold text crawled up the verification plate. Clause 14. Reinforced via cascade mesh. He didn't speak. He didn't celebrate. He simply tapped a final lock on the command plate, allowing the network to fully engage. His colleague Saren Tharvik stood behind him reviewing the slow seep of status collapses. That wasn't a warning, was it? No, that was a return to neutrality. You're calling this neutral? Koran glanced at the screen. Earth gave them time. They didn't respect time. Now they can negotiate without it. At the Concord Judiciary, legal AI nodes tasked with reviewing interstellar contracts began to cascade. One flagged a clause violation on a minor agricultural pact dated 73 cycles prior. That clause referenced a calibration sync rate no longer supplied by Earth. That violation, under the lattice fallback system, recursively cited back to its parent clause, Clause 14. Within minutes, trade agreements spanning entire sectors blinked out of existence. Ships in transit received no docking approvals. Mining claims were invalidated mid-transfer. Delivery rights defaulted. One by one, the economic foundations of the accord decayed, not loudly, not visibly, but like roots turning to dust beneath a stone foundation. Counselor Rethvak turned to the tribunal display, sweat collecting at his temples. We're triggering recursive legal nulls across unrelated systems. Koran didn't answer. He had already stepped back from the dais. Arbiter Veld stood slowly. Earth was bound under the same system. Doesn't this impact your own network? Koran turned at the door. Earth didn't build this to survive the treaty. Earth built it in case the treaty failed. Veld narrowed his eyes. What happens next? Koran let the silence speak. Then, as if on cue, the golden texts across the chamber dimmed and turned black. Contract voided, route frozen, access denied, and one final message materialized across the central screen. Clause 14. Enforced. Earth withdraws custodial presence. Koran left the hall without looking back. Somewhere beyond the legal councils, in an orbital merchant hub drifting above Etran's reach, a Zorvane freight vessel approached the docking clamps. Auto-locks refused to engage. Identification codes bounced back with static tags. Treaty base deactivated. They circled. Again, no reply, no landing. The port lights stayed dark, and in the distance, more ships arrived, each one slowly joining the pattern. A constellation of stranded vessels orbiting a world that could no longer tell time or law apart. On Earth, Saren marked the third phase completed. Koran checked the board. One by one the stars of trade and law flickered. Not extinguished, but no longer synchronized. No banners rose, no fleets launched, just the slow, coordinated quiet of a treaty that had been built on Earth's silence, and now inherited its consequences. Pull the valuation feed, now, before the Delta kills the ledger. Yarrick Voran's shout cut through the vaulted trading floor of the Athenes Prime Exchange, but no one moved quickly enough. Overhead, the sector's main heads-up display crackled with uneven pulses, its asset lines twitching like wires dipped in frost. Values retracted, surged, then vanished altogether. A moment later, the price index board rebooted midstream, replacing every asset class with a single blinking phrase. Index, unresolved. Contact stabilizer node. No one knew what that meant. Yarrick tore the input glove from his hand, slamming it onto the terminal pad. The relay wouldn't close. Transactions remained suspended, not rejected. Half-completed bids blinked in limbo, showing collateral already withdrawn, but with no product matched. Is this Earth's doing? Someone asked. Yarrick didn't look up. No. This is what happens when numbers have no gravity. The trader beside him wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow. But it's just a relay. Wasn't just anything. It was their calibration sync. You kill the anchor, you lose the system. 3 levels below in the data integrity vault, the Concord mesh filters had already begun rerouting through fallback nodes. But the redundancy framework required a constant. With Earth gone from the root lattice, the fallback cycle looped, unsure where to begin. The result? Nothing failed outright, but nothing resolved. Contracts dated back a century. Every clause relied on projected value indexes tied to inertial sync rates, which were pegged to Earth's stabilization grid. Without Earth, the values drifted, not all at once. Some widened by decimals, some vanished entirely. Cargo insurance expired mid-flight. Bulk rate assessments blinked from fixed to speculative. One shipping guild filed 12 disputes in 5 minutes, each one returning error tags too abstract to decipher. In Earth's continuity hall, Saren Tharvik stood at the stabilization interface with both palms pressed against the console's grounding pads. The screen ahead of him pulsed softly, segments dropping to gray as outer economic nodes detached in silence. Kavros entered without speaking. His eyes swept the status wall, watching the realignment shift from full grid to fragmented enclaves. Saren didn't turn. 72% of trade hubs relied on Earth for base rate correction. Another 18% used derivative inputs from our stabilization models. The rest? I don't think they ever ran their own numbers. Kavros stepped closer. What happens when the indexes go fully dark? They guess, Saren replied. And they starve. On Yellen Spire, a mercantile fortress in the Daruk Arc, 3 of the top 10 exporters were blacklisted within a single cycle. The automated customs protocols read their shipment declarations, then returned legal denial warnings. Contracts no longer verified, no stabilization timestamp, value indeterminate. Within hours, credit collapsed across 7 planetary banks, lines formed, withdrawals stalled, cash, once ceremonial, returned as leverage. But even physical commodities lost meaning without comparative markets. Trade ships refused to undock unless paid in hard resources. No one trusted digital deposits. One freight captain, Treg Vol, paced a corridor lined with sealed crates marked for the Vorix Confederacy. Why won't they let us offload? His logistician, a short man with sun-pale skin and a scorched wristband, scrolled through the docking terminal. No tax validation. Tariffs tied to Earth's rate sheets, without sync data, everything smuggling by default, even food, especially food. By the second day, 17 guilds filed legal petitions through Concord arbitration, citing unfair obstruction, but the appeals returned blank. The Concord mesh filters, originally designed to streamline legal automation and fiscal reconciliation, had entered neutral hold. They weren't rejecting inputs, they were waiting. The system required at least one confirmed rate node to calculate a valid market motion. Earth had been the anchor. Now Earth was absent. The filters held their breath, and in doing so, suffocated everything downstream. Inside Earth's control deck, Saren rotated the access keys with deliberate slowness, isolating outer economic regions one by one. Kavros watched the grid fracture. "You're not attacking," he said. "You're subtracting." Saren nodded once. "They turned our math into dependency. We're just stepping out of the equation. What about regions that adapted? They'll drift into inflation, then freeze. Hypervaluation without correction will collapse the buyers. Undervaluation collapses the sellers. Balance only exists when everyone agrees on the middle. Earth was the middle. On the outer ring of the Zorvane Transit Spire, Merchant Lord Cad Droll stood in front of a blackened display as his trade partners vanished one after another from the routing mesh. He reached toward the input panel, hesitant. "It's gone," whispered his aide. Cad didn't respond. His hand hovered over the screen. No values appeared. No currencies matched. There were still goods, still ships, still crews, but without framework, they had no meaning. Trade was never about objects. Trade was about trust, and Earth had silently held that trust in place. Cad lowered his hand. "Then we stop." On Earth, Saren Tharvik keyed in the final sequence. The screen turned gray. No fanfare, just absence. Markets had not exploded. Empires had not crumbled. They had simply been unmeasured. Kavros nodded once, almost to himself. "They won't notice what broke," he murmured. "Only that everything they touch feels wrong. By the time they trace it," Saren said, "there'll be nothing left to fix." "Counselor Veshin, you're out of time." The voice came flatly through the archive lens, its origin obscured by procedural tone. The recording room, a rotunda of sound-dampened stone and vault-dense walls, held no echoes, as if even acoustics feared to repeat themselves. Veshin Drell of the Zorvane Command Assembly stood stiff in the center of the Concord Tribunal chamber, robes unfastened at the collar, breath uneven. His case officers behind him did not speak. Each had watched the prior 3 sessions, watched as evidence failed to land, as counterfilings vanished in queues marked "no longer actionable," and now this. He stepped forward, lifting a weighted hand toward the tribunal plate. Earth's silence constitutes procedural evasion. They withdrew infrastructure, yes. But refusal to respond during inquiry violates Compact Article 9, subsection. Article 9 was linked to contractual trust integrity. Arbiter Calvin interjected without looking up. That pillar collapsed when mesh filters entered recursive hold. Earth did not void the clause. Your actions nullified its enforcement. Veshen's mouth opened, then closed. Around him, the half-seated tribunal flickered through heads-up confirmations. Pages of legal binding scrolled, each stamp once gold, now scratched with red crossbars. Text turned sideways. Clauses retracted themselves mid-sentence. A smaller screen lowered beside the dais, displaying a narrow message bar. Incoming from Jex Roth vertical bar origin. Continuity reserve node 4 payload. 1 transmission length. 3 words message. Proceed. Auth level irreversible. The tribunal clerk beside the center podium read the contents aloud. She didn't comment. She didn't flinch. Calvin adjusted his seat. You've submitted 5 challenges. None remain valid. Earth has not responded because it is no longer required to. That cannot stand. Veshen's voice cracked, too sudden, too sharp against the still air. No charter grants a sovereign the ability to withdraw mid-treaty enforcement. No charter considered Earth the anchor. Arbiter Halthan said from the northern tier, slow, weighty. We relied on them without ever asking who built the foundations. Screens across the gallery shifted. Recorded logs began playing. Financial breakdowns from collapsed trade stations. Guidance loops lost to temporal drift. Ships crashing into empty sectors with no time sink. Freight captains arguing with supply AIs over delivery timestamps that had never been real. Each clip was quiet. No blasts. No casualties. Only the kind of failure you feel when systems die still breathing. Counselor Vare of the Meriden Accord cleared his throat gently. Are we sure this is Earth's doing, or did we construct an ecosystem too complex to sustain? Earth filed Clause Vort 14th, Calvin said, tapping the legal log. They filed it 71 years ago. It was ratified by silence. Our silence. They built the fallback mesh. We used it. Then we broke it. The screen on the tribunal's upper left corner showed an empty chair. Seat ID. Terran representative. No motion filed. Time-stamped. Confirmed. In Earth's Vault 3, Jex Roth closed the transmission line, his expression unreadable in the filtered blue of the command alcove. No further codes required issuing. Clause 14 did not allow appeal once acknowledged. A junior operations analyst to his left adjusted the frame alignment overlay and paused. They're going to argue this for cycles. They're welcome to argue, Roth replied. But the court already ruled. He didn't mean the tribunal. He meant the outcomes. Back inside the tribunal chamber, the air thickened, not from heat but tension unspoken, the kind that settles on shoulders like unseen dust. Veshen's fingers curled inward as he stepped back, his case files dimming across the personal panel he wore. The playback behind him rotated to a visual of the Eshrak Belt's primary commerce loop, once pulsing with freighters, now faded into static-laced projection. Legal flags blinked across each sector. Transfer aborted. Asset tag revoked. Reference token invalid. Earth has not filed for retribution, Arbiter Calvin said softly. They didn't submit sanctions, didn't issue demands. They've not spoken in 5 standard cycles. Counselor Coram leaned in, scales flaring slightly with disbelief. Then what do we do? You recalibrate, Calvin said. To what? Another asked. To silence. The words hit harder than any verdict. In a private chamber carved beneath the northern tier, the tribunal's legal AI tried to run a cross-validation audit against Earth's archived contributions to the Concord mesh. The result looped twice, paused, and displayed a single sentence. All frameworks originated from non-revoked neutral source. Authority remains with originator. It didn't list Earth's name. It didn't need to. From orbit above Concord Prime, a minor diplomatic skiff from the Thurin block requested new vector lanes through the western corridor. The port AI flagged the request, rerouted it, and then failed to resolve final trajectory. 3 ships followed the same route. None completed the course. The failure wasn't physical. The paths just no longer added up. In the last minutes of the tribunal session, Arbiter Calvin returned to the podium. His eyes scanned the chamber, then landed again on the empty seat marked for Earth. The lights above it did not flicker. The systems tied to it were not malfunctioning. There was just nothing there to connect to. The tribunal recognizes, he said slowly, that Earth's presence is not required for effect. Counselor Vare shifted in his seat. You mean authority? No, Calvin said. Effect. The session log closed. The hall emptied. No judgment rendered. There was nothing left to weigh. The scales had already tipped quietly, irrevocably, and Earth had done it without stepping into the room. They're transmitting fallback orders to a command center that no longer exists. The words came from a comms technician, barely audible beneath the static-laced chatter, threading through the war room's decaying channel loops. His voice cracked mid-report, not from emotion, but from overuse. He'd been repeating versions of the same alert for hours, though none of them meant anything anymore. In the lower quadrant of the command bay aboard the Zervain Directive Bastion Varkos VII, 37 transmission logs stacked atop one another, each marked core relay pending confirmation, each blinking endlessly. No acknowledgement, no denial, just return pings chasing themselves. Commander Eric Solvek hovered over the central display, hands locked behind his back. He didn't blink. The display no longer responded to voice commands. It only updated when pushed manually. That alone was enough to send ripples down his spine. This system had once anticipated movements before officers completed their thoughts. Now it waited, and it waited in silence. Behind him, emergency protocols auto-populated the strategic feed with contradiction after contradiction. One node advised full withdrawal, another called for orbital entrenchment. A third ordered reactivation of economic shuttles long since blacklisted under Treaty Collapse Zeta. Solvek turned to the tactician beside him. How many of these are real? Tactician Rur ran his eyes down the feed list, jaw tight. All of them, authenticated, but none are time-stamped inside the same frame window, meaning, they don't know what time it is. Across 7 sectors, planetary defense nexuses reported losses of contact, not from jamming, not from sabotage, but from loopback. Each signal sent returned to origin milliseconds later, mirrored and nullified. On one feed, a governor called for emergency aid. The reply came instantly, except the signature was from a counselor who'd been confirmed dead 4 months earlier. In Earth's continuity hall, Dren Kavros observed the interlink collapse with the calm of a man watching rain fall after sealing the roof. No sound reached him in that moment. Just the quiet flick of desync reports rippling across the heads-up wall like frost crawling down glass. He adjusted the relay feed, focusing in on Zervain's deep command array. The structure was still intact, still powered, still online, and yet no orders were being received. Every signal generated by its upper tiers cycled back inward, spiraling into a loop so dense that the system's self-validation routine collapsed under its own weight. They've lost their center, Saren Tharvek murmured from the adjacent platform. Kavros didn't turn. They're still issuing commands, but they don't reach the limbs, they don't even reach the neck. Inside the Zervain Military Council vault, 7 command chairs sat occupied, but only 2 commanders still issued orders aloud. The others had fallen to whispered updates, transcripts of transcripts, relays forwarded from junior officers, unsure if they were violating chain of command by simply speaking. The oldest among them, General Voren Houth, watched a looping security feed of Sector 23's drone fleet hovering over an abandoned carrier. Every 30 seconds, the same confirmation blip flashed, awaiting further instruction. He leaned forward, fingertips tapping a dry rhythm against the panel. We told them to hold position, yes? Yes, sir. When? 13 hours ago. Then why are they still requesting the same order? The aide hesitated. They haven't received it yet. Houth's eyes narrowed. I gave that order live. You did, sir. It's still traveling. On Draven's Reach, a border command base attempted to reroute civilian freighters through what used to be a stable corridor between 2 trade stations. The corridor didn't exist anymore, not physically, but administratively. Its navigational frame had been tied to Earth's mesh sync, and without that anchor, the star positions refused to resolve. Guidance logs reported that the corridor had migrated, as if space had changed its mind. When the freighters attempted passage anyway, 6 collided with phantom intercepts, proximity warnings triggered too late. drift corrections lagging behind intention, no explosions, just glitches with consequences. Inside Earth's simulation chamber, Kavros keyed the final sector loop and watched the interface attempt to validate 6 separate command overlays from the Jorvain High Nexus. None aligned. One called for surrender, another demanded full mobilization, 2 returned static. One repeated a single phrase over and over, "We are waiting." He tapped the sequence into the record. "Upload it," he told Saren. To whom? Anyone still listening. On the bridge of the Uranus Valor, Admiral Renth Tal stared at the projected movement logs across the southern orbital cluster. The ships hadn't moved in hours, not because they lacked fuel or intent, because none of them could agree on which way was forward. Thrusters flared in tandem, only to counter each other seconds later. Course corrections overlapped. Orders came in layers, each one nullifying the last before the first had time to be enacted. Tal stepped away from the command well, removed his data ring, and laid it on the rail beside him. "I think we're at the end of our vocabulary," he said. His lieutenant frowned. "Sir?" Tal turned slowly. "We built an empire on momentum. Earth stole inertia." He walked out of the chamber without giving another order. Back at Earth's vault, Kavros watched the final feedback loop fail. No signal returned, no pings chased, just quiet where a system had once breathed commands like instinct. He leaned back slightly and whispered, not to Saren, not to the team, but to the failing network they once helped shape. "You don't conquer silence," he said. "You drown in it." And somewhere far across the stars, a fleet of command nodes blinked in perfect synchrony, waiting for instructions that would never arrive. Signal sweep complete. No inbound queries. No trace pings. Just static. The comms officer's voice barely rose above a whisper. It wasn't fatigue. It was reverence, like stepping into the ruins of a temple and knowing you weren't alone. Dren Kavros remained standing at the central observation deck, arms folded behind him, gaze fixed on the largest of Earth's internal displays. It no longer moved. No updates, no system prompts, only the slowly pulsing seal of the Continuity Authority, a pale ring of orbit-shaped inscriptions locked around a black interior. He didn't blink. The feed from Jorvain Command was still transmitting, multiple lines overlapping, breaking apart. Pleas for arbitration, requests for clarification, invitations to parley, citations of long-expired clauses, all bundled in increasingly desperate scripts. "Some of these aren't routed properly," Saren Tharvek said from behind him, leaning near the encryption console. "A few are bouncing back off old civilian frames. One's piggybacked on a weather archive. They're reaching," Kavros replied. "They're falling." He nodded once, then tapped the final relay line. The heads-up display responded with a terminal screen. Status: final pulse available. A single prompt waited below. "Send closure." Saren's finger hovered beside the touchpad. "One last message." Kavros turned. "They don't need a message. We always leave one." He considered the screen a moment longer. They already got it. He pressed the key. The feed blinked once, then went black. Across Earth's command systems, every remaining outbound channel flickered to terminated. Relay terminals deactivated. Frequency mappers returned null. No signals outbound. No sensors listening. The system shut itself into a shell, not from damage, not from defeat, but by choice. In Jorvain's central authority tower, a group of command delegates clustered around a display pulsing with denial, not red, not flashing, just silent. A communications officer turned, his lips moving slower than usual. "They've gone dark, fully." An elder diplomat, the same who had once laughed when Earth refused to submit interstellar tax codes, closed his data sleeve without speaking. A slow glance circled the room. No one asked what came next. They had asked already. Earth had simply never answered. And that, they were beginning to understand, was the answer. Farther across the sector belt, a mining vessel reported unexpected orbital tension across 3 of its satellite rings. The feedback returned non-resolvable paths, looped curves that couldn't be modeled against any known inertial law. They attempted to re-enter drift protocols. The drives refused to initiate. "Grav anchor can't acquire sync," one pilot said into the silence. "The chart's empty." "Was it Earth's?" the other replied. "Every sync was Earth's. They drifted for 12 hours. By hour 13, they began transmitting SOS markers that were only readable by systems built on Earth's lattice, and those, as of this cycle, were no longer listening. In the outer tribunal territories, a final petition document was filed. 5,000 pages, dozens of subclauses, signed by every remaining sovereign in the quadrant. Its title? Reinstatement of Stabilization Council, anchored through Earth custodianship. The document auto-submitted to the Earth Intercontinuity Accord inbox. It returned unread. The inbox, according to system logs, no longer existed. Dren Kavros stood alone now. The room behind him was dim. Lights faded to their lowest reserves. All heads-up interfaces slept, waiting for inputs that would never arrive. No flickering lights, no trailing signals, just a chamber once full of observation, now turned inward. He stepped forward one last time and touched the primary observation lens. The screen panned outward, through layers of low-orbit atmospheric reflection and wide capture orbital frames. It showed the fragment of the relay station once struck by the Jorvain fleet. It had not been repaired. No debris had been cleared. The wreck remained, spinning softly, untouched, still. A single frame drifted beside it, unlabeled, functionless, a calibration buoy never meant for anything more than pass-through alignment. It blinked once, then darkened forever. Saren's voice reached him again, softer now, spoken without expectation. "We didn't win, did we?" "No," Kavros said. "We ended it." Ending it was the win. The quiet held. Galactic law rewrote itself without vote. Systems migrated into fallback stability. Trade flowed, slower but safer. Star routes shortened. Sectors redrew their claims not by conquest, but by what was still reachable. Fleets powered down out of necessity. Councils merged. Supply chains reset around silence. Earth said nothing, not once, and yet everything rearranged around that lack. No anthem played, no banners were raised, but every system, every council, every survivor of the fracture looked back toward the Terran relay station, still inert, still shattered, still circling a blue-white planet, no longer accepting transmissions. The station remained there, unsalvaged, because none dared touch it, and because somewhere deep in the minds of those who remembered what had happened, those who felt the collapse of law, time economy, command and gravity, they knew that touching it might start everything again, not in fire, not in vengeance, but in recalibration. And the galaxy had finally learned. Earth didn't retaliate. Earth rewrote the frame. Then it stepped outside it, quietly, and left the stars to rebuild, now knowing where the line truly was.